Here, listen.
Nice to meet you.
So first of all, congratulations to the actors. Thank you so much. And for the directors. And it feels as a really fresh, urgent message, you know, from a place somehow far away, somehow very, very close to us. Marvin, you know Jalila Baccar's work so well. She has been here. We also went to the Segal. Where does this play fit in?
Well, it's part of a trilogy. It's her. She's working. She's always worked on a new piece, but this is the most recent finished piece. I think it's perhaps her darkest play, but it certainly fits into the ongoing struggle that she has as an artist and as a Tunisian woman in a rapidly changing society, a very turbulent one. There are a number of autobiographical things in the play. The character Haya, of course, is close to her, and she played this character. She leads the company as the leading actress in it, and often there is a key role that is sort of a raisonneur that she plays. The mention of the blowing up of the theater, the bombing of the theater, refers to an actual event in Tunisia just a few years ago, 2 years ago, I think, where the Salafists had targeted a number of cultural centers for bombings, and Baccar was the leader in a very large protest against this kind of activity in Tunisia. So there's a lot of references. Of course, the play is full of references back to the revolution and what's gone on since. I hope that despite the fact that events move on very rapidly, and now that we're focused on the Ukraine, the Arab Spring seems a long way away, but I hope you do remember that the Arab Spring started in Tunisia with what was called the Jasmine Revolution, which is referred to several times in the play. And although every country that has been affected by the Arab Spring, and practically every country in the Arab world to some extent has been affected by it, has been affected in different ways. Nonetheless, there is a very basic kind of struggle that is played out in different ways in the different countries between, and obviously all of these parties have many different factions within them, but in very crude terms, between the sort of westernized intellectuals like Hayat in the play, and the religious extremists, and which are a different group and groups in different countries and different shades of commitment and so on, but represent a particular area of position. And then a third group, which is usually the military, the people who have traditionally maintained power in the country by presumably protecting the citizenry from religious extremism. That is an old pattern which has now been set back in place in Egypt, although it's continuing to evolve. All these situations continue to evolve and continue to be negotiated. And this is very, very much, although it's a particularly Tunisian play, it is very, very much a post-Arab Spring Arab play. What are the tensions now? Who are the players? It is a very political play, obviously. Not all of Baccar's plays are as overtly political as this, but they're all political. And being a political play, it, as you can see, tends to move in the direction of agitprop. The people who are evil are really evil, and people who are good are really good. So there is a certain amount of that kind of political exaggeration in the play, but it does reflect real tensions and real conflicts. You might feel seeing the play, and I thought the production was just wonderful. You might feel seeing the play, this is terrible. How can anybody survive in this? How can Hyatt even deal with this? And people have said the same thing about Baccar. So why does she hang out in Tunisia? Why doesn't she just move to France and be done with it? Well, of course, as like Hyatt in the play, she sees and her company sees a commitment to the country and to a vision of the country, which she is working out as she can. I mean, right after the revolution, she was asked to become Minister of Culture, and she said, "No, my obligation, my contribution is in my art. That's where I need to help build the new Tunisia," and you can very much see that in this play. She's traveling right now. She's going to be back in Tunisia late in May. I've set up an appointment with her. We're going to be chatting a bit in late May, and I can bring you more sort of up to date of what the situation is. But I think the important thing to understand about the play is that despite the caricature, it is a statement of an ongoing dynamic, in particularly Tunisian terms, but a dynamic that people in Lebanon, in Egypt, other places will say, yes, I see that dynamic. I know that's sort of where we are in the post-revolutionary situation.
She's a quite variety of talent. She's a director, writer, so filmmaker maybe. How does she fit in the voices from Arab? What we hear? How would you? Well,
she is. I would say at this point, she's probably the best known dramatist from the Arab world internationally. Most of you will not know this or will not remember it, but one of her plays was the first play ever produced professionally from the Arab world in the United States. This was her play Carlson, which was played at the Arabesque Festival that was held at the Kennedy Center a number of years ago. They presented 2 plays from the Arab world, and this was the first one. Even within the United States, which pays almost no attention whatever to the Arab world, she is kind of a unique case. In France and Germany particularly, she's very well known. She's been produced at the National Theaters in Paris. In Berlin, an entire week was devoted to her work in 2010. She wrote a new play for that performance, and 3 of her plays were revived and 4 of her films during that week. So at least in Western Europe, she's quite well known, and she's fairly well known throughout the Arab world. So she does hold a very strong, very distinct position. As you say, she is her husband, Fadi Ajaibi, is the director of the company. And so she's not actually the director, though she's kind of the lead choreographer. And I think you could even in the reading could sense these are very highly visual, very highly choreographed productions. There are many scenes where there's no dialogue at all. It's simply visualization and movement and so on. And so she is the leading, she often has a leading role in the play. But as I say, the role, as you see here, the role is often more a kind of raisonneur. It's sort of a Europeanized older woman, and who kind of is a little bit outside the action and comments on it. She serves as a kind of a way into the play, whereas the real suffering and the dynamic of the play tends to come from other people, like Dora here. There's often a Dora character in the plays, but she is the central actor, if not the lead actor in the play, and she is the choreographer. The concepts basically come from her, and the scripts come from her. So she does have quite a wide range of talents.
Yeah, quite unique actually in any country, but also astonishing fact. Before we come to you, one last question of the translation. What was a unique, what was challenging, what was you wrestling with?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I was wrestling with is that it's the text is written largely as kind of poetic style. That is, there's just lines of information or lines of dialogue. Very often in the text, unattributed. You have to figure out who's speaking. And I would say 90% of the time I was pretty sure. Other times I wasn't.
95. I would say.
And that's a challenge I as a translator, I've never had before. But in terms of just the language, Baccar's language, I mean, it is a poetic language, but it's not an extremely poetic language. It's not like certain other Egyptian playwrights that I've worked on. It's pretty straightforward language. It's evocative, but it's simple, and it's very contemporary. That is, there's I mean, it's full of references to cell phones and Facebook. And as I was running along the Facebook, and I thought, and they say, don't post that on the wall. Is that a wall? Is that really a Facebook wall? Because my first thought was, oh, they're out in the street somewhere. And then I thought, no. So you have to realize this is right now, and keeping, not to fall into the trap of thinking something that is a reference to a contemporary phenomenon is something else. So it wasn't aside from the attribution of lines, it was not an extremely difficult text to translate.
But I feel it flows wonderfully. It's really, it's not any Arab sentimentalism in there. It's truly contemporary language, but still with some kind of poetic coloration in it that feels close and does come out of one hand. Most of they're improvising. She doesn't sit down and write a play. They create the work while they're rehearsing. So actually, when we ask her to give us the text, so they just had the words from the listener. Someone typed them up. But the person hadn't seen the play or something, or we didn't really know where to start with the characters. It's pretty obvious who it is, but still we needed some help, so we worked with them. So it is really work of theater and a great contribution, I think, also in the sense of world theater, how she works, and unique background. It's written in French, of course. How was it for you to read the play? Translate it in another way. You translated it not completely off stage, but still you translated it for us here too.
Right. Where our process is 2 steps removed, it seems, looking back, because there's the one thing which we created. I think I refer to it actually more, it feels to me more like a transcript than a script. And just hearing you say what happened, that it makes perfect sense, that it's actually someone else who wrote down what was happening. So that's the first stage, and then the second stage is Marvin's interpretation and translation of that, because not only is he translating, but he's interpreting as well, putting in context, and giving it a translation that feels as if people here are speaking, as opposed to a literal translation. So that's the second step, and the third step is us, because we didn't have Marvin in the room with us. So we're trying to figure out what makes sense in terms of the characters, and then speaking, what the situation and the context is. So we try as best as we can to approximate what the intention was in each moment, knowing that we're doing an interpretation, not a direct representation of what happened. If this were a physical production, we would have spent 3 weeks, and the actors would be memorized, and we would have time to really go into each of the scenes and discuss what happens. We had to really truncate the discussion, because we had 6 hours to put it up on its feet in a way that the audience would understand what was going on. Because you're not only hearing the words, but you need to understand what the relationships are with the characters, who's in the scene, who isn't. So it was a challenge of the highest artistic degree, yes. all concerned, and the actors were incredible, because they had to rely on their instincts and their artistry, because we had to work so fast. Like I said, there wasn't time for discussion, so they had to bring whatever was their first interpretation of the role and just go for that, and then wherever there was time, if it needed tweaking, we would tweak it a little bit, but it really was relying on their artistic impulses and instincts to craft what was then going to be this cohesive presentation. So there were maybe 2 or 3 places where we reassigned who was speaking, because it made more sense to have someone else speak the lines, but then theater is meant to be performed and not read. So it's only until you hear human voices reading it out loud that the final piece is complete. It's not complete when it's on the page. So it makes perfect sense that there were some things that we only heard when a living, breathing actor performed it. So
you asked for the French text, right?
Yes, we did. And I didn't know that they weren't assigned until I saw the French text, and I thought, oh my goodness, that is why. That is why, that makes sense. Because it really does say, just the beginning of the scene, it says, Amin and Dora. And then it's just line, line, line. And in some places there are hyphens, in some places they weren't. So it presented an incredible challenge for you. So yeah, we had the French corrections.
Especially when it's not just Amin and Dora, where you can kind of figure, oh well, this must be a response. Let's say 4 people on stage.
Right, completely, yes. Yeah. There were even some places where it said Hyatt. We were like, well, I don't think Hyatt's in this scene. Well, it's going to be Yosra, the notorious blogger, is in there. It must be her. So, but it was a wonderful challenge. It was just, we were there, and we were trying to, there were clues, and we were trying to decipher the clues, and sitting alone in your office or in your room, wherever you're doing that, I can only imagine how difficult that must have been.
Yeah. Quite a big part of the translation, which normally you never have to worry about. Before we come to maybe the actors and to the audience, you work a lot. You work also a lot in the US theater here. Would a play like this fit in? Would people come? Would you consider something doing this? Could you connect?
Completely, because it has the element of it that is ancient. Antigone, I think, is the piece that is very loosely modeled on for the Greeks. So it has this stylistically, in the text and in the structure too, you have these soliloquies, you have the chorus in the beginning. The chorus, the first 3 scenes that you saw, are not assigned who's speaking them, it's just text. And so it's open for interpretation as a director, which is wonderful. But it's also something that is very classical. In Greek text, you have a chorus that comes out and they set the scene, they tell you who's in the play and what's happening and what the moment is. And so that, coupled with this very immediate, current political and social situation, I think, creates a beautiful tension. But then I think a piece like this, very much so, the theatricality and the political context could make for some interesting theater right now.
I might say that Baccar has an Antigone. She's written an Antigone as well, so you're right on the money.
Okay.
Maybe a question to you, first of all, thank you for staying and listening. That doesn't happen all the time. That shows already that you're a bit connected. But some reactions from you about your work, or what were you thinking? How did you receive the text?
This was an enormously difficult task for me. I had very limited knowledge of the history. I sent emails back and forth to try to find out, send me some reference material so I could understand it better. And then we had, as you can see, this extremely limited amount of time.
Yeah.
And the fact that Saheem was able to put life into it and get us moving. I gulped when he said we're getting up. I went, let's just sit there with the scripts. But we actually, I'm impressed. I've done readings before, and this was a really marvelous effort on all of us to make this happen. So I have very difficult and very theatrical material that needs that stuff. And I kept thinking, oh God, how's it going to play without the projections and the music and the this and that? And yet, I think it does. I think it's got some tremendous bones here. So, very excited to work on this.
There's even some stage direction that was eliminated for the purposes of the production that were so symbolic and so beautifully orchestrated. And you would see from the beginning to the end when they're juxtaposed. And while at the opening, there's a moment of the shoes being thrown on the stage, and that really affected all of us. We're like, what does that mean? Is it that we talked about? Is it well, I think you were talking about this with the we were talking about the dirt of the shoe, and then the cleanliness of being without the shoe when you enter a mosque. But then, what does the shoe mean? It's this dirt, and then there's a scene at the end where corpses are thrown on the stage, and then it was like, oh wow, this parallel. Between the two sort of concepts. Here's the shoes, would you see empty shoes, what happened to that person? And then at the end you see that you feel these corpses. So just the movement of feeling that, what that could be, theatricality could be amazing.
One of the biggest challenges for me personally was trying to look at the timeline of the piece and trying to understand the structuring of time, because it seems like very much like a collage of words and events that are sort of interwoven throughout each other, and it's interesting to see sometimes when we're reading a scene and it feels like this would have happened before, but it's happening now after. I mean, it was just trying to understand the story of the characters in light of also the events of the Arab Spring, which feels like it has been going on for a very long time. So it's definitely, I think, symbolic of that in length.
And to go along with that, the relationships between the characters of everyone involved and what their relationships are. And it was interesting to think, was this the uncle? Is this the brother?
It took some time.
Or are these people, how are they connected? And I think listening, it sounds like they're all connected. It's all one community that's unfortunately at that lock with one another. So, very powerful.
But still utopian vision at the very, very end. And I really did feel, also what to say, the message had a life of its own, was something that she created, something, some ghosting, some voice that emerged out of nowhere about the situation in Tunisia. And theater, I think, is a way to hear and to make something manifest, even though it doesn't exist. But in the moment when you created it, it felt like a strong, very, very strong presence of a voice we would not know about, but felt honest and real and urgent and wants to be heard. So maybe go to some questions. So let's don't make it too long, but thank you for staying. But if you have questions now to Marvin, the director or the actors, or if you would like to say something, this is a good moment. Yes.
First of all, thank you all for all the effort. It was very moving. Hopefully not the only Tunisian in the audience, but it was very moving to me, and I have not seen the play. First question would be, was it translated from French or from Arabic?
Well, yeah, from French.
From French. And also, I just want to take a few exceptions to what's been said here. The characterization of westernized intellectuals, we don't see ourselves as Westernized as much as we see ourselves as Tunisian, and as the characters in the play, they defend a vision of Tunisia independent of Gaza and West, and others who defend another vision of Tunisia, and that's what's playing out. And I just want to mention that the character Hayat, that the word Hayat means life. And yeah, so and there are some discrepancies in the translation of just like in the name of God, the most compassionate, merciful. They're not translated the same way throughout, so it's kind of little thing. But yeah, it was very, very moving. And she mentioned as far as and her reference. This is what I really want to mention because I think we met last year, last time that Jalila came. It's very, very hard to, or actually utterly uninformed to speak of Jalila Baccar's work without the work of her company, the Nouveau Théâtre, since the 70s. She has not written by herself before Khamsoun, but all of that language that influenced Tunisian cinema, influenced afterwards, like even now what I hear on ads, that's the language that their touch on making literature out of Tunisian dialect in a contemporary way, with both very, very old references, like words that your grandma would use, and stuff that is contemporary. So just one.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's remarkable. I think her company has not been here yet. Right?
No, Baccar herself is here.
She was with us, I think. Yeah. Another.
Does the company perform in French or in Arabic?
In French, yeah.
In French.
In France, but in Tunisia it's in Tunisian Arabic. As I mentioned,
it's
a work on Tunisian language. And the Tunisian language is not French.
Okay, so it begins with that language then.
The same thing. This is it's very common in the Maghreb to do both French and Arabic versions of the plays, and they're so they can be performed at home normally in Arabic, and then but also when Khamsoun was banned in Tunisia, it actually premiered in French in Paris, and then eventually was done in Arabic back in Tunisia.
Jane, and then you, and then.
I'm very. I translate from Italian, and I know since the 60s there's a lot of dialect that's appearing. Well, some people call it language. Sicilian is considered my son's language, Neapolitan. So there's a lot of plays that are coming out that are both Neapolitan and Tuscan and Latin, and all this mixture. Is there that kind of mixture in this play, or is it all purely French? I mean, are there any words in Arabic? And when you say contemporary, what do you mean by contemporary language?
The language that is spoken.
But
which is not French, by their.
But you probably know this. Every particular region of the Middle East has a specific kind of Arabic, though. So Egypt and Cairo, they pronounce the G and not the J, the Jim. Algeria to Morocco have their special kind. Syria has a different kind of Arabic. Tunisia has its own, and so on and so forth. But it so happens that Egyptian Arabic is considered the lingua franca because of the great singers like Kulthum and the media. So the standard Arabic they use is the Egyptian Arabic, but you're right. Every country has its own dialect, which is very difficult to learn as opposed to classical Arabic, which is what you learn in school. And you never usually speak in the streets. So this was written in Tunisian dialect, right?
Yes, but the French version of it, however,
It's just French.
is in French.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not like, I translated a play by the Moroccan dramatist Siddiqui, that even the French version has Arabic words and phrases in it. There's nothing like that in this. It's straight out French all the way through. I mean, there are proper names, of course, and
But then you probably have
places
to,
and so on.
sorry Mark, you probably have to translate the prayers like you were saying.
The
That's
prayer,
usual, there are so many different translations of the Quran, so you could translate the formulator,
well, indeed,
merciful, compassionate, beneficent.
indeed, because there are so many different, I mean, you just take, for example, the attributes of Allah.
Yes.
Allah, the da-da-da, the da-da-da, the da-da-da.
Great.
There are infinite
Yes.
variations of that, and indeed, the play does that in the sense that I'm not sure that there is ever an exact repetition of we have the same three attributes in the same order when one of those catalogs comes up. I tried to literally follow the order that the French keeps them in.
Yeah, I don't think it's worth being pedantic about it, yeah.
Yeah.
One last question here.
I
The next place.
I just wondered whether she was influenced by Bertolt Brecht in epic theater, rather than the narrative.
I think not a great deal. I mean, Brecht has been of the modern dramatists the most influential on North African dramatists. There's a lot of influence in Algeria, but speaking of Baccar particularly, there are things you could say, oh, this is kind of Brechtian, but I don't see that. I would not. I don't see a particularly strong influence there. Certainly, obviously, I mean, she's very international. She's very well read. But indeed, I would say Antigone is probably a greater influence on this than Mother of Courage or something. Certainly, she's aware of Brecht's work, but it's not.
It's more formal and dignified than that.
Well, yeah. I mean, another playwright that I've translated is Abdel Kodar Alula from Algeria. He's very Brechtian. When you read a play and you think, oh, this is almost like a Lehrstück. I mean, the whole thing is laid out that way. And I should also say that there is not a typical Baccar play. This one is much more poetic, much more choric, much more classic, if you like, than, say, Arab Berlin, which is essentially a realistic Western-style play.
Oh, really?
So she doesn't. It's not as though she writes in an epic style or something like that.
We do have some plans perhaps to publish the trilogy. We are working on this. This might very well come out, so have a look at the play that will come out. So thank you, Marvin. Thank you. Thank you for the actor.